So, today I want to talk about immigrants rebuilding Florida after Hurricane Ian. The governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, is famous for his MAGA inspired anti immigrant rhetoric. In the usual nationalistic fervor of white supremacist dogma, he has tried to build himself as strong against migrants. He has touted that he's strong on law and order, creating strike forces and spreading false messages and narratives about the supposed threat of migrants coming into the state. All the while, he's been pulling stunts like his recent Martha's Vineyard exploit. Yet when Hurricane Ian devastated parts of the southwest of Florida, killing over 100 people and causing billions of dollars in property damage to people's homes, it has been migrant workers who have been called in to do the work of repairing everything. While it would be simple to just point out the irony and call it a day, the trouble is that the irony is part of the rhetoric and strategy, and part of the duality of a system that relies on the work of migrants to do everything, but doesn't want to see them in a white nationalist America. Now, America also apparently doesn't want to pay them for this labor as well, on top of all this. As when workers are arriving to help rebuild homes in Florida, they've also been subject to wage theft and unsafe working conditions. So let's talk about these migrants going to Florida to rebuild homes. So we have here that from NBC News, an article, Immigrants Workers Face Wage Theft and Unsafe Conditions as They Rebuild Florida. Hurricane Ian's wrath had barely subsided in Florida when advertisements for day laborers started popping up on phones across New York through online platforms like Telegram and WhatsApp. Advocates are saying that they are worried that migrants are becoming targets of fly-by-night businesses eager to exploit people for hard work and low wages. This looks and smells like human trafficking, said a New York community organizer with South Bronx Mutual Aid. They recruit them with these flashy photographs saying, "You're going to make a bunch of money, and we're going to give you this great apartment to live in." But then the workers arrive, and it's a different story. The same community organizer had said that she had already heard from several laborers whose wages had been docked to pay for their room and board, and they had told her that that was not a part of their agreement with the company. Meanwhile, some of the people who were recruited had only been in the United States for only a week. I tell them to keep staying in New York because that's where they're going to be safest, because New York is a sanctuary city, and Florida is just trying to send people to Martha's Vineyard. So, first of all, it needs to be said that these companies that are exploiting these migrant workers' labor are disgusting. You're already a company in Florida, right? You're one of these fly-by-night companies, and you're profiting off of people's suffering and the fact that homes and livelihoods have been destroyed, and you're being called in to more or less repair all the damage. Next, you're going to steal from people after luring them across the country after they've already traveled from other countries to the United States to perform labor for you and your company in dangerous conditions after a hurricane. You are really going to bait and switch people like that because you own the property and tools, and that somehow justifies it? This is the height of exploitative capitalism. These workers deserve far better than to be lied to, and the fact remains that they are being used in a system that takes their work but doesn't want the human being that does the labor. Especially as Governor DeSantis is continuing his nonsense of calling them criminals despite all of this that's going on. We actually move further into the same article and we see that on Tuesday, DeSantis said at a news conference that 3 of 4 people arrested in the previous week for ransacking communities following Hurricane Ian were illegal immigrants who should be immediately deported. They shouldn't be here at all, according to DeSantis, and that the company should be hiring locally. Many Floridians in Southwest Florida have had their businesses and livelihoods impacted by the storm and are looking for work. The private sector can help them get back on their feet by hiring locally for the length of the recovery, which will support the local economy for at least the next 6 months, he said in a statement. Except that's never how it works. Whenever these type of disasters happen, That's not how it works. And in general, that's not how it works. The US keeps relying on migrant workers for labor, pretty much throughout most of their workforce. Farm workers who pick oranges in Florida are mostly migrant workers. And every time we've seen a disaster in recent times, it's been migrant labor that's been rebuilding these cities and towns. We actually have here in an article from USA Today, for the past several years, migrant workers have arrived as the main labor force rebuilding cities after natural disasters, said a policy and analyst with Migration Policy Institute. The number of people from Honduras who flocked to New Orleans to rebuild after the city after Hurricane Katrina was so large that a permanent community was born, he said. Many workers at disaster sites are undocumented, which makes them even more vulnerable to abuses. In a survey of 361 construction day laborers, weeks after heavy rains from Hurricane Harvey flooded Houston, 72% were unauthorized immigrants, according to an Institute report. Now, it's also worth noting that people are quite aware about what's going on down in Florida. So far, the residents of Charlotte County, which voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in 2020, are happy to see workers show up to fix their towns. But that may not last, said a 52-year-old director of workforce engagement at Resilience Force, a labor organization that advocates for disaster cleanup workers. Port Charlotte has a lot of older white people, and they don't understand the customs of Latin American people who come to the United States. This one person who's speaking came to the U.S. from Peru. They are accepting us right now because they need us, but later, as migrants settle in for months or years of work, I think there may be some conflicts. And so this is something that keeps happening, and it's part of the same system. Migrant workers make up a huge chunk of the force of farm laborers, like I've mentioned. We've talked about how in Kentucky there has been migrant labor being used in factories to build cars. And we're seeing it here also, where we're seeing migrant labor being responsible for cleaning up all of these disasters that have been caused by climate change. And as climate change gets worse, migrant labor will be called upon more and more often with each disaster, because they're the people who step up to do the work. And all the while, people like Governor DeSantis will continue to use these hate-filled and fear-mongering tactics for white supremacist votes, all the while knowing full well that business interests rely on these migrant workers and desire to keep their wages low and the people vulnerable. It is a dual reality where they simultaneously convince the people that, it's in their interest to continue to discriminate and hate these people who are quote unquote taking their jobs. But at the same time, they are constantly supporting the same businesses who end up exploiting people, especially these fly-by-night businesses who constantly exploit the system in order to rebuild cities like what's going on in southwestern Florida. And Florida, as well as most of the United States, is set up for more disasters in the near future, with climate change just getting worse. And again, they will rely on these migrant communities to perform labor and get out of sight afterward. Because, again, they want to keep stealing the entirety of their labor, including every cent of them by constantly taking more and more through wage theft and putting people through dangerous conditions. But they don't want to see the same migrant people who help to rebuild their homes in the aftermath. They're really helpful when they come by and they rebuild your home, but it's not really enough when they're your neighbors. Then you need to take care of them and kick them out, because that's a problem. And that's the story of Florida and the United States right now when it comes to these types of topics. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord, where we have political conversations like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below, and with that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you so much for watching.